The morning after their conversation at the cafe, Chris awoke to the harsh reality that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. The news of his engagement to Sarah had spread like wildfire, and the media frenzy was only intensifying. Every detail of Sarah's life was being dissected, analyzed, and sensationalized, turning what should have been a private matter into public spectacle. Chris sat at his desk, staring at the headlines flashing across his screen. The woman who tamed the billionaire. Inside the secret life of Chris Anderson's fiancée. The articles ranged from speculative to outright intrusive, and each one filled Chris with a growing sense of dread. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Board meeting in 1 hour. They're concerned about the fallout." Chris sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew this meeting was inevitable, but it didn't make it any easier to face. The board of directors had always been focused on protecting the company's image, and this latest development was sure to raise alarms. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting, Chris's thoughts drifted to Sarah. He hadn't heard from her since their talk at the cafe, and he couldn't help but worry about how she was handling the sudden media attention. He wanted to reach out, to reassure her that everything would be okay, but he knew that right now he needed to focus on damage control. When the time came, Chris entered the boardroom with a steely resolve. The room was filled with the usual faces, men and women who had stood by him through countless challenges, but today their expressions were clouded with concern. "Chris," the chairman began, his tone measured but firm, "we've all seen the news. This engagement has put the company in the spotlight in ways we weren't prepared for." Chris nodded, his expression unreadable. "I understand, but this is my personal life, not the company's." "Personal or not, it's affecting our public image," another board member interjected. "Investors are nervous and the media is spinning this story in every direction. We need to get ahead of this before it does real damage." Chris knew they were right, but he wasn't about to let them dictate his personal life. "I appreciate your concerns, but I'm not going to let the media or anyone else dictate my decisions. My relationship with Sarah is real, and I won't let it be manipulated for the sake of appearances." The room fell silent as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, the chairman spoke again. "We're not asking you to end the engagement, Chris, but we do need to manage the narrative. We suggest issuing a public statement, something that can reassure the investors and calm the media frenzy." Chris considered the suggestion, weighing his options. A public statement could help control the situation, but it also meant exposing more of his private life to the world, a life he had always guarded so carefully. "Fine," Chris agreed, his voice firm. "But the statement will be on my terms. I'll make it clear that this engagement is a personal matter and that it won't affect the company's operations." The board members nodded, relieved to have reached a compromise. As the meeting adjourned, Chris felt a knot of tension settle in his chest. He had managed to buy some time, but he knew that the pressure was only going to increase from here. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own battles. The media attention had turned her life upside down, and everywhere she went, she felt the eyes of strangers on her. The constant scrutiny was exhausting, and the flood of messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years only added to her stress. She sat in her apartment staring at her phone, unsure of what to do next. Part of her wanted to call Chris, to hear his voice and find comfort in their connection. But another part of her felt overwhelmed, as if she was being swept away by a current she couldn't control. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She hesitated, wondering if it was another reporter. But when she peered through the peephole, she saw a familiar face. "Mom?" Sarah opened the door, surprised to see her mother standing there. "Hi, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice filled with concern. "I've been worried about you. Can I come in?" Sarah nodded, stepping aside to let her mother enter. They sat down together on the couch, the weight of the past few days hanging heavily between them. "How are you holding up?" her mother asked gently. Sarah shrugged, trying to hold back tears. "I don't know, Mom. Everything's happening so fast. I just feel lost." Her mother took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "It's okay to feel that way. This is a lot for anyone to handle, but you're strong, Sarah. You've always been strong." Sarah sniffled, wiping away a tear. "I just didn't expect it to be like this. I thought Chris and I could have a normal life, but now it feels like that's impossible." "Normal is overrated," her mother said with a small smile. "What's important is that you love each other. The rest will fall into place." Sarah nodded, trying to take comfort in her mother's words. But the doubt still lingered, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was being tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Have you talked to Chris?" her mother asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not since yesterday. He's dealing with his own issues, and I don't want to add to his stress." "Sarah," her mother said softly, "you and Chris are in this together. Don't shut him out. He needs you just as much as you need him." Sarah knew her mother was right. She needed to talk to Chris, to let him know how she was feeling and to find a way to navigate this storm together. That evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Sarah picked up her phone and called Chris. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm despite the tension she knew he was under. "Sarah," Chris said, relief evident in his tone. "I'm so glad you called." "Chris, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm scared. I don't know how we're going to get through this." "We'll get through it together," Chris assured her. "I promise you, Sarah, I won't let anything tear us apart." "But what about the media and your company? How are we supposed to deal with all this?" Sarah's voice wavered, the stress of the situation weighing heavily on her. "I've got a plan," Chris said, trying to sound confident. "I'm going to make a public statement, something that will take the heat off us and let everyone know that our relationship is real. After that, we'll take things one step at a time." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside her. "Okay, Chris, I trust you, but please don't keep anything from me. We need to be honest with each other if we're going to make this work." "I promise," Chris said, his voice full of sincerity. "No more secrets. We're in this together." As they ended the call, Sarah felt a small sense of relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, but knowing that Chris was by her side gave her the strength to face whatever was coming. The next morning, Chris stood in front of a camera, ready to deliver his statement. He had carefully crafted his words, making sure to emphasize the sincerity of his relationship with Sarah while reassuring investors and the public that his personal life would not interfere with his business responsibilities. As he spoke, the world watched. The media had been waiting for this moment, and Chris knew that every word he said would be scrutinized. But he remained calm and composed, determined to protect Sarah and their relationship. When the statement was over, Chris felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done what needed to be done, and now it was up to the world to react. Back at her apartment, Sarah watched the statement on her laptop, her heart swelling with emotion as she listened to Chris's words. He had taken control of the situation, but more importantly, he had made it clear that she was his priority. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she knew that as long as they faced it together, they could overcome anything. But as the episode drew to a close, the camera lingered on a shadowy figure watching the statement from a distance. The figure's expression was unreadable, but the glint in their eyes hinted at something more sinister. Unbeknownst to Chris and Sarah, new challenges were on the horizon. Challenges that would test not only their love, but their very survival in a world where wealth and power could be both a blessing and a curse.